Hi, folks. This is Luke Mell, and this is a belated introduction to this podcast. I've already released a few episodes, things that I've been sitting on for a couple of years and was eager to put out into the world. And now moving forward, I can do things with a little more intention. I'm an outdoor educator based in Anchorage. My company is Triple Point Training, and I teach swiftwater rescue, ice rescue, avalanche education, trip planning, wilderness risk management, basically all of these things that I encounter going outdoors, especially based in Alaska. And I want to prepare as well as possible to avoid things going wrong, and I want to have the technical skill set to respond if they do go wrong. And I'm going to try to bring both of those things into this podcast space. This will be the first episode that is intended as an episode, and this is a conversation with Charlie Walbridge. Charlie is my go-to resource whenever I have a statistical or fact-based question regarding river incidents. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Charlie. So I refer to you, and I refer to you pretty much in every one of my courses because I bring up the accident database, and I refer to you as the American Whitewater Accident Database guru. But it would be beneficial if you could introduce yourself and give a little more detailed background. And then I've got a series of questions, and some of them come from email exchanges we've had. I'm curious to hear about the new book that you've got coming out. So that's kind of where I want to go.
Well, I'm Charlie Walbridge. I started paddling in 1967 with a bunch of guys. We were the college outing club, and we were trying to figure out how to run whitewater. And fortunately, there weren't any really difficult rivers in the vicinity, so that we were able to learn by trial and error. Eventually, I connected with books like the Appalachian Mountain Club had a couple of really good instructional books, good for that era. They wouldn't be considered, the Whitewater Handbook would be considered rather primitive now. And also American Whitewater and the Safety Code. And that plus trial and error, we learned how to paddle. From there, I ran rivers and raced for many years, was a part-time guide. I ran a business. It was initially selling kits for life jackets, spray skirts. Ran that until 1995, and which point I went to work for NRS as their East Coast outfitter rep. But in the safety area, I was at a slalom race where a guy was killed, Class 2 slalom race. That really shook me up. And I had come from a bit of a mountaineering background and knew that, people analyzed and talked about accidents. Well, I couldn't find anyone who wanted to write up this accident, so I wrote it up.
Mm.
And it turned out, as it went around, people said, "Oh yeah, there was one just like this," and on the Nantahala, on the Obed, until finally, it became clear that what we were talking about is foot entrapment, and then that standing up in the river could have fatal results. And that was the first report I wrote, and it got me selected as American Canoe Association safety chair. Ended up doing some liaison with Coast Guard and then with a couple of state agencies, which eventually developed real swiftwater rescue training programs, and that was a huge plus. There started being state programs taught through the fire academy. It just became another skill set, like vertical or confined space, or any of a number of things that firefighters train for. I kept up with the accident reporting, and of course that's changed a lot. Initially it was mail or phone calls, but things really picked up in the late 80s when email happened. And at this point, that was when O.K. Goodwin, the longtime safety chair of American Whitewater, retired, and I took his place. Going back to the accidents, it went from mostly by mail, but I went to getting email, and of course with email they were sending me accidents outside the paddling community, and because of what I'd done with the state agencies and with the Coast Guard, I realized that it was important to know what was going on there, because even if it's not somebody from our community who we know, their death has effects on the wider society. It affects river management. It affects law enforcement. One of the reasons I got into training rescue squad folks was there is nothing that makes people angrier at paddlers than having a rescue squad guy go out to rescue a paddler and get killed. And that was happening fairly regularly, mostly with low head dams in Ohio. So we had to get the training there. And now things have really, really improved. And of course, I have this amazing picture from the Anchorage Fire Department of them rescuing a kayaker where you've got a motorized raft and moseying up and a guy working a chainsaw. I said, "Whoa, that's Alaskan." The picture is worth 1,000 words, and it says a tremendous amount about the competence and training of these guys. Because if they hadn't done that, that guy would have just sat there until he died of hypothermia. He got stuck underneath a down tree. Nowadays, for whatever reason, I get most of my accident reports on Facebook Messenger. I still get a lot of email, but I think Messenger is just that much easier to use. And I use Messenger a lot when somebody says, "Oh, there was an accident, let's say on the Chattooga River in Georgia." Well, I'll go to some of the southern clubs and ask if anybody knows what's going on. Of course, I got a few friends down there, and you start to collect some information. And one of the things I want to emphasize is I'm a reporter. I'm trying to I'm trying to get I'm trying to put information out in front of people, and so to get people talking about what happened, talking about safety, talking about what could have been done to avoid it, how you want to change your own actions. And to give you a real good example, I'm 76 now, but about 20 years ago, maybe 15, but in any case, a fellow died on the Gauley, and he was about my age, same sort of paddler skills. And I saw what happened, and I said, I don't need to be up on the Gauley anymore.
Hmm.
Not on the upper section. Lower section's a lot of fun, but I don't go to the upper anymore. And in that case, it was a bit of a wake-up call. But that's the whole purpose of the accident reporting and the database and everything, is to get people thinking about what happened, thinking about how it applies to their own paddling.
And this is exactly why I wanted to get some of your time, because you are in really like the unique position globally, because
I don't know about globally, but
I think nationally at least, because having all of these accident reports either created by you or filtered through you, you can provide the learning lessons. I got to work with American Whitewater this last year as they are revisiting the safety code, which they do every 5 or 10 years. And I was just struck with how overwhelming the problem was to identify what are the key points, because we all come at it with our regional biases or our craft biases or our personal experience. And so that's when I reached out to you and said, what's the data show? What are the big issues?
people paddling without life jackets, people going into extreme conditions. I imagine for you guys, extreme cold is a major issue. But whether you're talking about floodwaters or bad weather in open water, people going out in extreme conditions that they're not prepared for, and folks who are using either alcohol or drugs, which messes with your coordination and your judgment, folks who don't know the river, and folks who are either boating alone or they have a one boat trip. And if you got 4 people in a raft and the raft tips over, you got 4 people boating alone, because nobody's going to help them. There's no safety backup. And those are the biggies. When you start talking about other things, about downed trees and sieves and flush drowning, that's relatively small. And one of the things that I learned working with the Coast Guard is they look at what is happening in the among experienced paddlers. That's just almost a sideline for what they do. I suspect it's less than 10% of the total. And a lot of this stuff is really, is tragic in the sense that the folks were not looking for trouble, especially since the pandemic. You've got a lot of new people. They bought boats, probably from a box store. Sometimes the box store doesn't even sell life jackets. And they just want to get out on the water and float around and have a good day. But they get on a river, and the river has a little bit of push, and there's a downed tree, and bingo, you've got you've got a fatality. And I think more people are wearing life jackets now than they were in the early 70s when I was working with Coast Guard, but it's still, I think a lot. I've got a paper in front of me that says over 25% of the accidents reported to AW have no life jackets. But I think if you go to the recent accidents, like in the last 2 years, it's significantly more than that.
Mm.
And that's the one thing, we'll protect you from everything, but it'll really help. You also get a lot of these accidents, which it's what the boating safety people call sudden disappearance syndrome. The guys say, well, we were paddling along, he flipped his kayak and he didn't come back up. Well, people flip in their boat, they get confused. And of course, if they're doing alcohol or drugs, it makes confusion that much easier. And without a life jacket, they swim the wrong direction, or maybe they inhale some water, so they're pretty paralyzed, and they just disappear, just freaking disappear. And you see that story over and over again.
I want to touch back on the solo boating one because that's such a big one within the packraft community. And so just a couple weeks ago, we heard of the first fatality for 2024, and it was a solo paddler in Russia. And so, of course, our statistics are a lot smaller, which is a good thing. But that was the 11th solo fatality out of 24 total known packrafting fatalities. And that doesn't even include, I think, effectively solo, to borrow that term from the avalanche community. Have you heard that in water circles?
No, but it sounds like effectively solo sounds like what I was talking about with a raft load of people.
Yeah, and I think it's a great term and hope it will get more adopted by the water world, where you can have a very competent team for partners, but if you're in the wrong positions, the person that's in trouble might be effectively solo. So looking within the packraft community and the messaging I want to do, basically over half or more are solo. I'm often asked in my courses, people say I don't have partners, and sometimes I go alone, and they ask me what I think about that, and I've got an answer, but I wonder what your messaging is to people.
Well, everybody I know who paddles solo from time to time. And the main thing is that it really increases your risk because if something happens, there is no backup. And for like a whitewater paddler, just say running a local river in late afternoon, I mean, probably isn't going to die from it, but he might lose his boat, might lose gear. And if somebody had been around, they would have helped him. And of course, with less skilled people, you get folks who get stranded or who get washed downstream into something, or they're just in the water too long, which in your part of the world, I suspect is a real issue. I mean, where I am, once we get into June, most of us are boating, with maybe a paddle jacket, maybe nothing, and that never happens in Alaska. No bare
Right.
chested boating for you guys,
Nope.
so you're just much more exposed. And the way smart people deal with it is they paddle things that are well below their skill level, and they make sure that all their other precautions, like having the right gear, are being taken. It's not a good time to forget your life jacket or not to wear a wetsuit. We see a lot of that here in the ocean kayaking folks. I don't track those accidents, but I certainly hear about them. And it's like somebody gets into an ocean kayak, paddles out, and tips over, and the water's cold, and nobody's around, and that's it.
Good. That's really similar to the response I'm giving. I'm using I like to put everything in the framework of hazards and exposure and vulnerability, mostly to try to bring those terms up toward the front of people's brains. But it's like the hazards are the same, whether you're by yourself or with a group, but you're much more vulnerable if anything goes wrong. And one way to balance that vulnerability is to reduce your exposure by paddling down a level or committing to portaging things that you would run with your
Absolutely.
normal team. So I want to change topics a little bit, and probably the most common debate within my circle of water instructors is how much time should we spend on these different exercises? And I think that's usually a question of like what's statistically most relevant. And so by different exercises, I mean wading across a river using throw rope, setting up a rope system with 3-to-1 pulleys and everything. And I've seen some of your opinions on this too, but I want to pose that question to you, and maybe the way to answer this, again coming from the accident database and your experiences, what do most rescues look like?
Most rescues are very routine. If you look at 911 calls, 911 is often called by paddlers who are stranded on a rock or who are on the wrong side of a river or who are in the woods and are lost. It's amazing to me that people forget their life jacket, but they got their cell phone. They're
Um,
routine. They're paddlers picking up swimmers, rescuing boats, grabbing gear, wading out and releasing an easy pin. Then you get things that are a little bit more, say a pin that's bad, and you've really got to get people together, and maybe you've got to put a rope on it. I have not used a Z drag on the river except one time, but that's me. There are a lot of people, particularly the folks who run big rafts, who may encounter it more, and it's more important. But the most important thing is the swimming, wading, throw bags, getting people comfortable in the water, comfortable moving around the water out of their boat. Because a lot of times that's how you solve the problem. You solve the problem by getting somebody to where the pinned boat or the person in trouble is and putting their hands on it. Now, after that, you can teach the Z drag, you can teach the stabilization, snag lines, cinches, and when I have done my courses, I'm a little light on that because in order to make some of that stuff work, you've got to have a whole team with a cinch that knows what they're doing because you'll never organize one from one side of the river. So, as I said, focusing on the basics with a rescue life jacket, just getting people in it, giving them the experience of releasing the jacket and being lowered, so that the first time they use it isn't when they're on the river and something is seriously wrong and they understand what they're getting into.
Along these same lines, something you shared in an email, I pulled it up from a couple of years ago, that really stuck with me and that I bring up in every of my courses. And I actually don't have a question here. I'm just basically going to say what you've already said, but maybe you can expand on it. Is that the river world is a little bit unique in these incidents in that the highest qualified person isn't necessarily the one that's in a position to help.
Right. And that's one of the things that I talked about years ago was the idea of a leaderless rescue because you can have a trip leader and all commercial trips have a trip leader. But if you've got a raft pin halfway down the rapid, the trip leader who is in the lead may be a half mile downstream. And so the people who are best equipped to lead are the people who are close by. And what I tell people is don't wait for somebody to tell you what to do. You look for a job that's not being done and then get it done. It might start out you're trying to get close to somebody. You might get out on a rock with somebody who's pinned in a kayak and trying to help them. But you don't want too many people on the rock because then the big problem is going to be people falling off the rock and pulling other people with them. So a second person would get close by on a nearby rock or shore, get a throw bag out and offer help. You always want downstream safety so that if there's another person, they might sit downstream. Another person on eastern rivers, I'm sure you find this laughable as an Alaskan, but on eastern rivers there's a lot of traffic. You put an upstream lookout there to make sure that nobody comes down on top of you while you're trying to make the rescue. And then the last thing is that if you have somebody extra, send them to the other side of the river or the chute, because if you've got to do something, that'll really simplify things. Now, if you're paddling down, you see somebody in serious trouble, desperate trouble, and you don't feel comfortable doing it because there is no law that says you've got to put your life on the line for somebody. You get as close as you can and blow your whistle and get the more experienced people in the party up there.
Yeah. So most of the people that come to me for instruction, specifically packraft stuff in Alaska, they are there because they've had something scary happen. And so
Yeah,
they are maybe, 2 years, 1 or 2 seasons into river sports. And at least within Alaska, a lot of people are being introduced to water through the packraft. That was my case as well. So I'm curious
packraft is
how
an
you'd
amazingly cool and capable boat. It's of all the new crafts that are out, to me, it's the most interesting.
So I'm curious how you would, and again, I've got my answers for that in the class, but I'm curious how you would guide somebody that comes to you and says, "Hey, I've been on the rivers for this is my second season and I had this scary thing happen. Like, how do I get more proficient? Where should I go next in my learning journey?"
The first thing I tell them is to work on their skills, because the best accident is the one that doesn't happen.
Hmm.
And then you talk to them and see, did they recognize what happened or did they blunder into it? Because if they blundered into it, then it's education. Like, there's a family up on the West Branch, about an hour and a half from here. They all bought new kayaks. They put on a little bit of current, and one of their kids got shoved under a tree, and they weren't expecting that. They weren't looking for whitewater. And you get people, even people with some experience, who don't know what a sieve is, who don't understand that you've got to keep a group together, and so that you want to make sure that they're fully educated. But that plus work on your skill. When I was younger, I boated with mostly people who were hardcore A and B rank racers. We almost never had a swim, never had a problem. Now that I'm old, of course, I swim, and I need good friends.
So I have pre-ordered your book. I haven't seen it yet. I know the title.
It's
Um,
coming.
it's coming. Yeah, I'm excited. Can you just, in case folks are interested, can you give a little summary and some of the learning lessons from there?
I think the easiest thing to do is to tell you about how it came about. The accident database is not something that's stationary. It's something that periodically myself and a few other volunteers, we go through the entire database and look at a given category to make sure that it's being handled properly, and that this says it was a flush drowning. Well, read the description. Was it really a flush drowning? Or might it have been a heart attack? But at one point, I went through all the near misses, and I said, wow, there are some amazing stories here.
Hmm.
Some stories that are truly inspirational. And of course, I've done collections of fatal accidents before, but it's kind of depressing. And I'm really fascinated by this sort of thing, and so it doesn't get me down as much as it would get some people down. But it isn't exactly fun reading. This book is inspirational. This book shows paddlers being courageous, having ingenuity and persistence, and it's much more of an up. And that, to me, is going to reach some people who might not pick up the old ACA accident report.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it. My big push in May, so May has for whatever reason we've kind of made that the pack rafting culture of safety push, and everybody does outreach and marketing for safety messaging. And my focus this year will be to try to get more of that near miss and close call reporting done, just because that's such valuable data as far as identifying what we can improve on.
Yeah, and it's from my standpoint, it's a little tough because you don't want all these stories. I fell out of my boat, I swam, my friends rescued me and got my boat. But all of these stories in whitewater rescue, these are the hairy, scary ones. These are the things that you might not have in your entire paddling career. These are the sorts of things, though, that when they do happen, they scare the hell out of you.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was taking pictures at a lead-in rapid above a waterfall, and I saw someone enter the rapid, and I said, "She's offline, and she's going to pin." So I put the camera down, and I was at the rock when she pinned. And with a little bit of struggling, and we were being careful because I didn't want her to go over the waterfall, we got her out. And I just sort of had to sit down and collect myself for a little bit after that. And the thing is, most people will not encounter a serious incident in their career, but that doesn't mean you don't prepare for it. It's just like mountaineers might not encounter a serious situation in their career, but they'll still get ready for it.
And I think that preparation is fun. Of course, I'm biased. I'm in the business of it, but I love coming out. I mean, even from the instructor side, getting to practice all those ways to work with the water and anticipate what can go wrong. Like, I enjoy learning that. I think most people enjoy learning that. It helps us feel more capable.
What the people told me in the courses that I've taught is that the one thing that they came away with is they were just more comfortable in their boat, in the water, on the river, and that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, I love that. You've really dedicated a lot of your life to being on the water. I'm curious why that's been so meaningful to you, if you have any reflection on that.
Oh, for one thing, it's fun, and for another thing, it's about the people. When I realized years ago that when I tell stories about rivers, it's not often about the rivers. It's about the people who I'm on the river with. Guys I've run river with, guys I've guided with, guys I've screwed up shuttles with, and guys I've helped out. And that's where it's at. It's also a tremendous diversity of people. I grew up in Manhattan, went to private schools, very rarefied. And it was really neat to get to paddle, and you just meet all kinds of people. The guy who you're paddling with, he might be a doctor, he might be an auto mechanic, he might, it could be anything. And I love that. I love the diversity, and sort of the different personalities and quirks of people. I haven't met too many people paddling who haven't liked.
Well, cool. I don't need to take more of your time. I definitely want you to know that your work has been really influential on me, and through me your work reaches everybody that I have in class. And so thanks a lot for that work, and I think reading through and working through some of those reports would be really hard on me. It's just like you're saying, the sad parts of it. But so thanks for doing it, and I think it's significant work. It's helping a lot of people.
Well, I appreciate that, but I couldn't do it without all the people who send me stuff. And I try to talk about the accidents in a straightforward way. I'm just interested in finding out what happened so we can all learn.
Yeah, it's the learning journey. Cool. Thanks a lot, Charlie.
Well, you bet, Luke. Take care.